Okay, we're recording. I am Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined today by my friend Matt Strohl, who is Professor of Philosophy at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. Thanks so much for joining me, Matt.
Hey, Brandon, good to see you.
All right, we are talking about your book, this awesome book, Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies, which just came out from Routledge. I love this book, absolutely.
Thank you.
Love it. It's one of the most fun things I've read, and not only is it fun, but like there's some really deep stuff in here. For something that took me maybe 3 hours to read, just because it's so clearly written and engaging, like there's a lot of deep stuff. So I just want to get right into it. There's a huge distinction that you make early on that's relevant to the entire discussion in the book, which is the distinction between loving bad movies and ridiculing bad movies, right? That there are sort of two general ways of engaging with bad movies in a way that's sort of saying, well, I like bad movies. One way is I just love them. The other way is I like them by ridiculing them. So could you talk about that distinction, since it really sets up everything in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Brandon. So I myself am an avid participant in bad movie culture, right? I not only do I watch bad movies, but I seek out other people that like bad movies and interact with them and try to make friends with them. So it's something that from my point of view as a participant in this culture, you really see two different practices that kind of coexist. And so part of why I was interested in writing the book was to try to disentangle these two practices and also to make an argument for one and against the other, right? And the two practices are, as you said, what I call love and what I call ridicule, right? So I think ridicule is actually the more popular face of bad movie culture. This is the way most people know it, I think, because of Mystery Science Theater 3000, which, has been on TV since I was a kid. And Mystery Science Theater 3000, I'm sure most people listening know what it is, but it's this TV show where bad, like old beam sci-fi movies and other sorts of bad movies are played. And then there's like some fictional characters that ridicule, make fun of the movies while they're playing, right? And this is there's been many copycats, and then like Mystery Science Theater 3000 itself has been replaced by Riff Tracks, which now kind of just doesn't have the sci-fi theme anymore. It just kind of does any old movie. That's really what most people know, right? Is like when you think of the phrase "so bad it's good," you think of like that kind of thing, of like people getting together and watching a bad movie and making jokes about it, making fun of it, having a laugh, right? But the thing is that I think every single person listening to this who watches any movies at all, right, will be familiar with this feeling of like watching something and in some sense apprehending it to be bad, but loving it for that reason, right? Like, I just love that about this, right? And like, one example that I begin the book with is The Core, right? And like in the movie The Core, Aaron Eckhart gives like this really bonkers performance that's like way out of step with everybody else. And like everybody, the critics reviewing the movie were like, that's his bad performance in the movie, right? But like, I agree in some sense. I get what they mean when they say it's bad. It's like, the performances doesn't fit with the movie. It's way out of whack with the rest of the movie, but that's exactly what I love about it. And it's not that I like making fun of it. I've never once made a joke about it while watching it. I never once like said anything, I never once had any thought about it other than, oh my God, I love it. Right? So like, I don't think that model of ridicule and making fun of something really fits this phenomenon of bad movie love. And indeed, I find that that's how I relate to bad movies in general. I never really find myself having a good time making jokes at the movie's expense, right? Now, there's a different version of it that we can get into where I think there are ways of making jokes that are with the movie, that are appreciative of the movie, right? That's a different phenomenon that we'll have to disentangle, right? But like bad movie love is about taking those aspects of the movie that are in some sense apprehended as bad and embracing them, not instrumentally because they give you kicks, but in their own right as the artwork that it is, right? Like embracing that.
Yeah, and I think one way to get at that is your account of what makes a movie so bad it's good, right? And so can you talk about that a bit, right, in terms of breaking received norms and conventions within the
right.
film universe?
So I mean, I don't believe there are such things as like absolute norms for the art form. Like there are no rules for making movies. but there are these kinds of sort of contingent rules that crop up in given contexts relevant to certain practices. So like, Hollywood filmmaking has developed certain codes, certain conventions, and those conventions for, within a certain context, function as norms, right? Like there's a sense that, like, for example, in most Hollywood movies, the major events of the story are well explained, like why they happen, right? And so when a major event is not explained, like, so for example, all of a sudden the characters, my example in the book is have a boat, like, and the thing is, the reason I use that example is that's what happens in the theatrical cut of Return of the King, right? And in the theatrical cut of Return of the King, they cut out the scene where they get the boat. So all of a sudden they just have this boat, and you're like, that's bad. Like, where do they get the boat, right? And so, like, that's an example of a received norm, right? The norm that, like, major events in the story should be explained, right? Now, there's nothing about, like, the medium of film, right? Like putting light through celluloid. There's nothing about that inherently entails that the events of story should be explained. Indeed, that doesn't even entail there needs to be a story at all. And so it's just this practice that's sort of been developed over time in this context, in particular, the codes of Hollywood filmmaking, and also other filmmaking traditions around the world as well have a similar norm. And so when a movie breaks that norm, right, we don't necessarily judge it to be bad, but we ask, but there better be a reason for it, right? And if we don't, like, apprehend that there's some, like, artistically serious reason for breaking some norm, that leads us to judge that a movie's bad, or at least bad in that respect, right? And so, like, the bad movies turn out to be the ones that break the rules, that break the norms, but in a way that is not perceived as being artistically serious or for some good artistic reason.
Yeah, so the boat that shows up near the end of Return of the King, right? Would you say that's a moment that's so bad it's good, or is it just bad?
Well, I don't know, because that's a tricky case for me, because I don't really like, honestly, I like the first two Lord of the Rings movies, but I really don't like Return of the King at all. So, like, I actually find it, I kind of like that part where they get the boat all of a sudden, but I'm actually not a big fan of that movie. I don't like, I could go into why, that would be another podcast, but I have a review on Letterboxd if anyone wants to look it up. You can look up my name on Letterboxd and you'll find why I don't really like Return of the King.
Nice. So do you have a general account of why some things are lovably bad versus unlovably bad?
Yeah. I mean, so I don't think that I think that it's highly subjective, right? Like, in other words, I don't think it's like, if there's any area of aesthetic life that's subjective, it's which bad movies you like, right? Like, nobody's gonna nobody better give me a talking to about which bad movies I do and don't like. And I'm not gonna, it's like, and that's part of, I think, what's great about it, right? That's what I love about bad movies, is that our liking of them is so expressive of an individual particular sensibility, right? Because when you get to something like, take a movie like Nomadland, right? I know exactly how to engage with Nomadland. There's a script for it, right? It's like it's an indie drama with, the travails of neoliberalism, and Frances McDormand poops in a bucket, and when she poops in that bucket, I'm supposed to think, like, okay, neoliberalism sucks, right? and like, so there's a script for that. But with something like, take a movie like, I don't know. I just watched a movie last night called The Paganini Horror, this, like, wild, bonkers Italian horror movie that makes no sense, right? And you watch a movie like that, and there's not, like, a script for it. It's like some of the cuts just don't make any sense. And like, you don't really know how to take it, how to react, and you can't just sort of follow the script for how to engage with it, right? And so, what it's all about, I think, is finding things in these movies that somehow are appealing or interesting or exciting. And I think that happens in so many different ways, right? I think that like infinitely many different ways of finding value in a movie. And so what I want to say is that it's like, there are ways of violating received norms that are not perceived as artistically serious, but in their unseriousness, like in their, or perhaps in their sort of, let me get to this in a second, but in their unseriousness, they're somehow thrilling to us, right? And again, I don't think that's going to be the same for all of us. And I think part of what's fun and interesting about this is the way that bad movies give us an opportunity to be creative, to find ways of seeing things that are idiosyncratic and that we're essentially innovating, right? But the other thing I would add, sorry, go on, give me your next question, actually. edit that bit out.
No, that's fine. But one thing that just occurred to me is I'm reading Return of the King right now with
Yeah.
my 8-year-old, and the boats just show up, and then they're explained later, right? So that's one thing worth noting. I guess that's a way that it tracks the book, and yet it's sort of maybe a failing where it's just like, where the hell did they get the boat? Whereas it's meant to be artistically serious, right? It's just for time they couldn't show them get the boat, whereas in the extended director's cut you have that scene where they do get the boat. But yeah, and so I guess there's this idea then that I mean, one thing that you said that I think is really important is that the bad movies we love and why we love them are expressive of our individuality. I think that's absolutely right. That's absolutely important. And there's a further point that you made that no one's going to talk me out of loving the bad movies I love, right? That's not even a worthwhile project, right? Is it ever worthwhile to try to talk someone out of liking any movie, not a bad movie, but like, Nomadland, for example, right? Like, is that worth, like, this is not a good movie, even though it's, an Academy Award nominee / winner or whatever, that despite all these accolades, it's really not that great.
Well, obviously, I believe there's an important role for negative criticism, right? But my view, and I know that you agree because we've talked about this before, but like, I definitely think that the goal of negative criticism should not be to win, but rather to promote our own engagement. And in my view, when I'm offering a negative critique, I am open to being talked out of that, right? I mean, in some cases, I might be personally invested. I might, have sort of a personal axe to grind where like, I really want to hate this and I'm going to hate it. And like what I'm doing is expressing my contempt in a way that's not open to being contested. But like for me, when I'm critiquing something, I'm saying, okay, here's why I failed to appreciate this. Tell me what I'm missing, right? And I think that like there's a lot of criticism out there that is more just sort of beating up on things and knocking things down. And what I find about what I like, of course, again, like whatever, right? Like there's a role for negativity, don't get me wrong. But like at the same time, I feel like a lot of the time these critics are just making jackasses out of themselves, because like I feel like 95% of the negative criticism I read, I have a strong sense that this person just doesn't get this thing and they think they do, and they think they're smarter than it, and they're really not, and they're embarrassing themselves, and it's not that they might be right, but their tone is so self-assured that I find that they're embarrassing themselves like a lot of the time, right? Because it's like, well, you didn't really try to think about this from the point of view of someone who likes it, did you? Right. And like, it's like, I read a lot of film criticism, so it might be different in different art forms. Like I'm not making any claims about opera criticism right now, which I don't read, but like I read a lot of film criticism, and like this is what I get a lot. Like people are, when they're being negative, it's often a big ego trip. It's often like people who like this suck, I'm better than they are, and here's why. And it's like, that's not how, I mean, again, like that's not how people write criticisms of the movies, but the contemptuous tone, I think, to me often conveys this sense of self-superiority. And I think that the negative criticism that I most enjoy and that I tend to go back to and continue to engage with is the sort that is open to being convinced, right? That is like, here's my problem with this. Here's what I don't like about this, and is open to being convinced, if somebody has a response to those considerations.
Okay, good. So what you just said basically was that the form of negative criticism of film that you don't like is ridicule, right? It's contemptuous, it's showing disdain. And that then gets us back to the initial question of bad movie ridicule, right? Where it's not, saying I dislike this thing, but I'm expressing my liking by means of ridiculing it. So what's wrong with that way of engaging with films, with bad movies in particular?
I don't think so let's be clear then. So I think there's a distinction here, right? So there's one way of making a joke that's appreciative, okay? So like, for example, I give the example of audience participation rituals for The Room, right? So the movie The Room, like one ritual is that there's, that like the male characters in the room throw a football around all the time. It happens like It's like all of a sudden these guys just go out in the alley and toss a football around. And it's really hilarious because of course that's not a thing that adult men actually do, right? I mean, we might play catch with the football, but it's going to be like at the park and we're going to be throwing it real far. Like we're not standing in the alley behind our apartment just tossing a football around, within 5 feet of each other.
I don't know. Whenever my guy friends and I put on tuxedos, it's football tossing in the alleyway time.
Right. It's very funny though. But like when people in the movie theater, when it happens, they break out Nerf footballs and start tossing them around. And to me, that is celebratory. That is not making fun of the movie in a derogatory way. That is like, oh my God, this movie rules. I love it. Let's throw a football. It's so funny, right? So I'm not like, I definitely think that there is such a thing as like playing a kind of rhetorical game where you're making jokes about the movie that are loving and appreciative, right? I definitely think that's a thing, right? So what I'm separating out are cases where that's not what you're doing, cases where in some sense you don't like the movie, right? Where like, where it's not a loving gaze. It's not like you're celebrating these aspects of the movie, but rather you're tearing it down, you're knocking it down and like laughing at how funny your jokes are about it, or like relishing the sort of Schadenfreude of the artist's failure, or relishing a sense of superiority towards people who actually like this. And I think that happens a lot with like things that are meant for, say, young girls. It's like Twilight. People like to like make fun of and ridicule Twilight partly because it's like, oh, I'm not a young girl. I'm better than that. So it's like, think about the 17-year-old like movie bro who's like, I like Scorsese and The Godfather and The French Connection. Twilight's for girls, right? And so when they make fun of Twilight, there's a sense of propping up their own sense of superiority over people who like Twilight, right? And like that is, and it's like, so the sort of Mystery Science Theater 3000 crowd, I think that definitely comes in degrees. I don't like, there's definitely a lot of those people are mixed appreciators, right? A lot of the people that are into that stuff, they are both bad movie lovers and they enjoy a little bit of ridicule, but they don't necessarily push it too far into cruelty. There are other examples that I do think reach the level of cruelty, but I don't mean to say that all these people are just like super cruel, right? I just mean to say though that to the extent that it crosses over into ridicule, what I mean by that is that it's not loving, that it's grounded in contempt, superiority, whatever, right?
Yeah, so then it seems like what you're giving then is something like a virtue ethics with respect to bad movie appreciation. So could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very much implicit in the book because I don't want to like start preaching. I don't want to be moralistic. What I rather want to do is lead by example, right? In other words, what I try to do in the book is portray my own warmth and affection for bad movies in a way that is inspiring to the reader to want to like embrace them in that same way and to make the reader not want to make fun of them in a mean-spirited, contemptuous way. So in other words, the ethics of the book is like, don't you want to be the kind of person who loves this stuff? Don't you not want to be the kind of person who ridicules this stuff, right? And like, I think I've been thinking a ton about this quote from M. Night Shyamalan. So when his most recent movie was released, Old, he had this great interview explaining how like, a lot of his movies that are his favorites of his own movies are the ones that people never liked, and and he knows in time people find him and so on. But like the thing that was really striking to me was that this analogy he gives, right, which is like he talks about like when he was a kid, or I can't remember if it's autobiographical or if he just makes up like imagine if, but the story is that a little kid comes to school for the first day. And he's dressed really expressively, right? He's like, it's his first day at school, and he's got like this scarf of his mother's that he's always loved and he's excited to wear, and like his grandfather's old hat, let's say like a bowler's hat or something that he's always loved and is excited to wear. And he like looked at himself in the mirror and he's like, I look awesome, right? And then but the kid looks, it's got like a very mismatched outfit, right? And he shows up at school and everyone else is wearing the exact same Abercrombie hoodie and jeans. And he's got this grandfather's hat and his mom's scarf and he's looking all funky, right? And like the second he sees everyone else dressed the same, he suddenly sees himself through their eyes and he's like, I'm gonna get my ass handed to me today, right? And Shyamalan says that's how he feels when he debuts a new movie, right? Now, like, there's something we need to think about. So like making a movie is really, really hard, right? It requires any movie really, but especially like a feature film, is extremely difficult and requires a huge amount of effort, especially, independent films, things like that, just enormous amount of work from the people who made them. Now, that's not to say like, oh, therefore we have to love them somehow, that like we have some moral obligation to be kind to these films. I'm not saying that. It's not the form of like an obligation. It's rather, what kind of person do you want to be, dude? Like, what kind of person do you want to be? The kind of person who makes fun of that kid, really, right? Who that kid comes in with their weird out. Maybe they look terrible, in some sense. Do you really want to be the person making fun of them, right? Is that what you want to be? Or do you want to be the person who's like, that kid freaking rules, right? Like that, look at how cowardly we are, and look at this kid's expressive spirit, right? That's the right attitude. So when I see a movie like that it's just bonkers, right? That like breaks every rule, people hate it. Something like, I don't know, the core is not even bad enough though. Like, like Serenity was one from a couple of years ago, everybody, with Matthew McConaughey, right? When I see a movie like that from this year, the one where, what's the name of that movie? The one where you can hear men's thoughts. Forget the name of it. Anyways, you see a movie like this, it's just completely bonkers. And like all these other movies that look exactly the same as each other, with like Superman or Spider-Man or Batman or some man or some kind of a comic book hero, whatever. But you got a million movies that look like that. And then you got this one weird one that's snuck in there. And you're going to make fun of that weird one and tear it down because it's not like the other ones. It's not me. Like, that's not who I want to be. And again, I'm not going to try to tell you have a moral obligation to celebrate Serenity or to celebrate the core. I'm just going to ask you, what kind of person do you want to be, right? Like, do you want to be the kind of person who makes fun of the weird one?
I like that. It's like nicely Kierkegaardian in a way, right? Like against leveling to the lowest common denominator and sort of,
right.
But one thing that I sort of thought of, and I've thought of this before, and I think I mentioned this to you like a while ago, that the two modes of engagement of love and ridicule, right? That they're both supposed to be expressive of your liking of the thing, right? The ridicule mode as a way of expressing liking sort of seems to me like, yeah, this kid's my friend. Like the kid who dresses weirdly, his grandpa's hat, his mother's scarf, these bright purple shoes. He wears that to school. Yeah, that kid's my friend, right? We're friends, but oh, he's wearing that to the first day of school. I'm gonna make fun of him with the other kids, right? And that's my, I'm gonna be friends with him still. I'm gonna maybe apologize for doing it, but I don't want to be seen as too close to him, even though on the weekends I hang out at his house or something like that, right? And that seems to be, to me, sort of the mode of engagement that the bad movie Ridicule has, right? You're still my friend, but around everyone else, I'm gonna shit on you.
Well, that's like the mixed engagement, right?
Yeah.
That's a lot of, that's how I describe the mixed engagement. There are definitely some people that just like to ridicule this stuff and don't like really care for it at all in its own right, and it's mixed. Like I do participate in this culture, so I do try to like observe, and you don't find a lot of people who are pure ridiculers, really. They don't have any affection for this, but who make it a big part of their life. But I think a lot of the casual walk-ons are pure ridiculers, right? Like there are plenty of people, and the thing is that the stuff people ridicule, it's like, I'm not going to name names, but like we're both on academic social media, and you definitely see these academics who just love to like team up and like, especially stuff that they perceive as being somehow socially, politically regressive, which again, it's often like, I'm a Clint Eastwood stan, so you can raise Clint Eastwood as an example of this, right? So it's like you get examples where you get like these little groups of academics who like are like have their little smug superior ridicule where they're like, let's say, making fun of Gran Torino or something, and like it's just so obvious to me that they're getting off on relishing their own sense of moral superiority, right? And like not, and the thing is that often that's leading them into these really perverse judgments that like, and they're embarrassing themselves, right? Just like the critics I mentioned earlier. So it's often like, I think that if you're some like left-wing academic who's like making fun of Clint Eastwood movies, and like making a big joke out of it, like, oh, like to talk to his Obama chair, like make fun of Gran Torino, I think you're making a fucking ass of yourself, right? I think that you're totally embarrassing yourself. And I think that like anybody who knows anything about this is sitting there thinking this person's complete, no idea what they're talking about. And I'm not going to jump on and comment that because I don't want to talk to you about it because you don't know what you're talking about. So it's not an interesting conversation for me to have. But I'll just tell you, if you're out there shit posting Clint Eastwood, I'm judging you. Okay?
Not on Clint Eastwood, but another filmmaker.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed John Dick for this series, and we talked about his and Matt Johnson's paper on good bad movies, right? And in that interview with him, I mentioned sort of my attitude towards Tommy Wiseau, which you mentioned in the room before, right? Where it seems like someone like him may deserve some degree of ridicule, right? That there seems to be enough evidence to suggest that not only is he himself sort of bizarre, but that he was a real asshole to a lot of people while making The Room, right? And so is it wrong still to sort of take some glee in the fact that he's failing, and part of my enjoyment of the film is watching this guy who seems to be an asshole fail?
I mean, look, as I sort of admit in the book, like you can make a better case for this than you can, I think, for something like, ridiculing Troll 2 or whatever. But like, two directions in which I would answer this, right? The first direction is that, like, I do not like the tendency to put everybody in like the good camp or the bad camp, sort of black and white thinking, such that if someone is bad in one way, they're bad in every way. They're kind of like, right? And like, people are complex. Everybody's both good and bad in all sorts of ways. And like, I know that's not a popular sentiment among progressives in the contemporary political climate, but I'm sorry, I live in Montana. I got neighbors. They're conservatives. They're good people. There's not in every way, but in some ways, right? Like, and so like, I definitely think that everybody, even awful people, have redeeming values often, and that it's okay to appreciate them, right? And like, Tommy Wiseau is awful in many ways, and no one should deny that, I don't think. Like, at least if you can take Greg's, based on the story in the book, The Disaster Artist. So taking their word for it, which I have no reason not to, based on their testimony, he did a lot of bad things, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing about him that's admirable, right? I think that Tommy Wiseau in many ways is very admirable, right? And the trick is to sort of balance that, where like there's an easy mistake to make, which is because someone is admirable in some ways, admiring them, right? Like, and like to court, right? And like thereby like tending to downplay their faults and so on. And I think that, there's been a lot of work done on that tendency to like, to apologize for people and to defend them on the basis of our admiration for them and to like discount their wrongs. The solution to that should not be to stop admiring their good qualities. The solution should be to stop letting that lead us to dismiss their bad qualities. The solution should be to see them in their complexity and their ambivalence, right? And so like with Tommy Wiseau, I think we can see him both ways. We can see him as an asshole, but we can also see him as a unique creative sensibility, to say the least, right? And the other side at which I would approach it is that you're only cheating yourself, right? It's like, sure, you might be able to justify ridiculing it, but I believe that you are having a worse experience and you're cultivating a worse character, a worse way of being for yourself, a worse way of seeing the world, a less kind, a more haughty way of seeing the world that you shouldn't want to develop. And again, if you want to, that's fine, but like I don't want to, and I have trouble seeing why you would.
Yeah, so you and John are both trying to talk me out of the Schadenfreude I feel. I don't know. I kind of like my Schadenfreude.
Again, you do you. My ultimate normative view here is you do you on this. I don't really think it's a matter of obligation. I think it's a question of what kind of person you want to be. And I think like, I know you're a good dude. If there's room in there for some Schadenfreude, so be it.
Okay, so one question I have that somewhat relates, and I think I know how you answer this, and maybe we've touched on it a bit already, is are there any films that deserve something like ridicule, do you think?
Well, so this is interesting. This is an interesting question. Something Eric Catella-Mathis, Eric, something that Eric has said that really resonated with me about how he does referee reports, kind of changing the subject, is that he says that I'm always nice unless I think that the paper is not being nice, right? And I think that there's something to be said for that as a policy in general, which is like, in other words, when I'm writing criticism, I try to be generous, even when I'm dislike something, try to be generous, unless I think it in some way it's not being nice, it's not being generous, it's not being right. And what that means can boil down in different ways, right? But like, take for example, like it's easier to see, like take for example, like a documentary about bad movies that is full of ridicule, right? Like let's say, so let's like something like Mystery Science Theater 3000 or let's do riff tracks. Let's do riff tracks. So like the thing about riff tracks is they'll do stuff like they'll edit a movie and introduce a discontinuity by editing it, and then make fun of the discontinuity that they introduced, right? And like they'll often, I think, like it's like in making fun of the movie, they'll reveal themselves to be jackasses in a certain way where I like, and it's like, because it's like, if I'm interested in ridiculing something, I'm ridiculing the riff tracks commentary track, not the movie, right? And if there's like a movie, there are definitely, I think, some movies that like in their relationship, for example, to the horror genre, express a sense of smug superiority. So like some of the newer like elevated horror style movies that try to correct the horror genre in certain ways, I think that they overcorrect and they, in a sense, like express disdain for the horror genre and a sense of self-superiority in a way that makes me want to ridicule them potentially, right? Like, so like, I see ridicule as a kind of corrective to ridicule, if anything, right? It's not like my favorite way to spend my time, but if it's like, it's sort of a weapon that you might need to pull out sometimes, right? But then the other thing is that there's something to be said, I think, for the ridicule applied to the case where art is just purely commodified, where it's just like a pure capitalist commodity. And it has like, it's like, there's a sense in which it's the existence of some artworks are like disrespectful to the art form, right? So like, I didn't even watch it, but maybe this is unfair because I haven't watched it, but like based on everything I've heard from people I trust, that Red Notice movie on Netflix would apply, right? Because it's pure soulless product, right? It's like, there's no idea here. It's purely derivative. We've got like 3 stars that are marketable and like totally uncharismatic, like combined. And it's like watching the Netflix Twitter account, they tried to create viral moments from the movie. Like they took like lines from the movie that just no one possibly could care about. Like there's some joke. Oh, I know what it was. There's a bit in the movie apparently where Ed Sheeran is a cameo, and Ed Sheeran says, "I'm Ed Sheeran, bitch," is the line. And the Netflix Twitter account tried to make this a viral moment. They tried to be like, no one will ever forget the Ed Sheeran joke, right? And the thing was that like I can totally appreciate the urge to dunk on that, because it's like what Netflix is doing is taking this art form that I love, film, and is just perverting it in a way like it's the most cynical possible product. It's like, oh yeah, people will eat this shit up. We can sell it to them. There's no concern whatsoever for like any kind of creative expression, right? And so like, and again, like there's a lot of stuff that you might lump that in with. Like you might like pretty much the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. You might be able to make a similar case, and so on. However, there's a rub to this, right? I tend to think that this kind of anti-capitalist, sort of anti-consumerist disdain can very easily become a kind of elitism and judgmentalism, in the sense that the reason this stuff sells, right? The reason that this is produced as a consumerist product is that a mass of people buy it. And so there's a sense of like, in singling out that stuff as fair game for ridicule, I'm elevating myself above these hordes of people that love this stuff, right? And so I used to do this. I'll say this. I used to ridicule this stuff. I stopped doing it when I got on Twitter. And it's not because I wrote the book and I changed my mind. It's because I realized this dynamic, right? It's because I realized that there are a ton of people, like there are accounts on Twitter, so when I got on Twitter, I just like said, I'm interested in art films. And then I just followed all the people they suggested, right? I just went as a curiosity to see what happened. And like a lot of these people who I follow who have like popular film Twitter accounts, they just post 30 tweets a day making fun of the MCU and like trolling Marvel fans. So like, and they'll do things like post spoilers antagonistically. They'll do things like they're deliberately trolling. And the point is often to like lure in these Marvel fans to like comment on their posts and then make fun of them for their stupid comments, right? And this stuff, and so after about a week of that, I never wanted to make fun of Marvel again, because these people are so full of shit. Like, these people are so full of themselves. They're like, it's like they act like Marvel is so unimportant, but that's all they think about, right? It's like you're tweeting 30 times a day about Marvel, you're obsessed, right? So I unfollowed, I muted everybody talking about Marvel, and I just never have a taste for that again. You know, and it's like the red notice is kind of like a more minor version of the same thing. So it's the kind of thing like, I get it. I think it's even justifiable. I used to do it, but it's not for me.
Got it. So one last question, maybe one last question, maybe it'll lead to something else, but
yeah.
Do you think, and I know your answer to this, but I want you to say something about it because I could see someone making this sort of claim. Do you think that loving bad movies is indicative of having bad taste?
Fuck no. Come on. John Waters, right? At the beginning, I had this quote from him, which is like, to know bad taste, you've got to have been taught the rules of the tyranny of good taste. You can long to break them. So it's like, I mean, loving bad movies is a progression. The way I would do it is like the galaxy brain meme, right? It's like you start out, it's like, you know, it's like baby's first movie is like, I don't know, Taxi Driver or something, right? And then you progress to like, you're like, okay, now I'm watching Ingmar Bergman. And then you progress to the point where you're like, okay, now I'm watching like Huey Straub, like weird esoteric Marxist shit. And then you progress to like genre film, and then the end point, the galaxy brain, is Twilight, right? So I would say that the people, I mean, the bad movie lovers, like, keep in mind, these are not people who don't also watch art films. Like, there's a study on this I cited in the book. These people are also into art films. It generally, I believe that the kind of bad movie lover I'm talking about is in general often someone who's a movie lover in general, and it's a sort of, they've diversified their taste. And the thing is, I mean, I don't think taste is good or bad. I think it's the wrong metric. It's interesting or uninteresting, I would say, right? So it's like there are plenty of people who have good taste in the sense that they like all the shit they're supposed to like, where I could not possibly care less, right? But if somebody tells me like, yeah, my favorite movies of this last year were, you know, Memoria and Halloween Kills, I want to know more, right? I want to know more about that opinion. It's super interesting, you know? So like, I mean, good, bad is for rating taste is not, to me, the primary metric.
Awesome. Well, Matt, I'll think we should leave it there. Thank you so much. The book, once again, is Why It's Okay to Love Bad Movies from Routledge. Thanks so much, Matt. This was fun.
Thanks, dude.